Thank you, Mr. Speaker, sir. Mr. Speaker, sir, I'll be very brief. It would appear that most of the people who commented was on the Financial Management Act Amendment Bill. Mr. Speaker, sir, just very briefly, though, before I do talk about that, Honourable Gary Tambua, who I understand has already left, talked about consultation with the taxi drivers, etc. We had very large-scale consultations. We met with the minibus drivers, the taxi operators, all other operators we did meet. Obviously, we had a lot of discussions around it. And as the Honourable Minister has highlighted, that these matters will, of course, be dealt with. There'll be a transition period. But what really went to show is that in her speech, which gave it all away, she said, "Oh, I'm sure as we are talking at the moment, the emojis or emoticons would be going, LOL or whatever it is." It goes to show that they're essentially driven by these, live reactions to statements they make or policies. We don't do that. We actually look at the long term. We're not there hanging out for one good emoji or emoticons, whatever they're called. Mr. Speaker, sir, she obviously got it wrong. In fact, I don't have even should, I think, give any credibility to a response laced with sarcasm. We know who writes that kind of speeches. But Mr. Speaker, sir, essentially, I'll start off by saying that she said, the definition of economic shock. Now, if they read it carefully, if we, for example, set out a debt strategy, if we set out a fiscal strategy and say, this is how we're going to manage our finances, and by the way, this is the first time, which they should be glad about, that actually a law will require the sitting government to provide that type of information. We have to make it public. No government hitherto has been required to, under any law, provide the debt strategy, provide the medium-term fiscal strategy. No government. There was no legal requirement. Now there's a legal requirement. And they're making a mockery about economic shock. Of course, we can set out the best plan. If, God forbid, we have a major cyclone, a category 5 like Winston, which completely reduces to rubble 1/3 of the value of the GDP within 36 hours, obviously the plans you have set in train will have to be altered. So it'd be foolish to say we'll have this fiscal strategy put in place and we will implement it come what it may. It cannot work that way. We are vulnerable to climate change. We are obviously now vulnerable to pandemics. So that's why the definition of economic shock needs to include the definition as it is laid out. Mr. Speaker, sir, the other point I want to make is that the Financial Management Act amendment, in fact, has been developed in conjunction with the Asian Development Bank, IFC, International Financial Corporation, World Bank. It has the endorsement of our development partners, Australia and New Zealand, that have accepted this as a policy action in the reform policy matrix, which resulted in the budget support. That's the rationale behind it. Mr. Speaker, I would have thought that they would have welcomed the bill as it brings greater transparency and accountability. These are groundbreaking financial policy reforms. We are aligning to international best practice. If they're bothered to even look at that, if there is research that go in and type, key reform action for the World Bank budget support. So, Mr. Speaker, sir, I cannot understand. Honourable Tuisawau, for example, went on about, he got the Data Bureau thing wrong. Honourable Premier Kumar, I think, just has schooled him on that. The fact of the matter is Data Bureau had no legislative mandate. In fact, you could have a $20 outstanding bill and somebody could report you. If you look at the current regulations, nobody can report you unless you have an amount outstanding that's more than $300 or more. Before, companies, even though they may not have delivered something to you, there was a case, for example, the internet company, Connect, many cases, where they, for example, people bought a package for $50 a month for providing internet services. Half the time it would be down, and then they would still bill them. If the people disputed the bill, what they would then do is simply go and report the person to Data Bureau, and then the next time when the poor person wanted to go and, for example, do a higher purchase from courts would refuse the debt. They would say, you owe $50 to Connect. And even though you disputed that because they did not provide you with, full monthly data connection, you still were forced to go and pay that. That's what happened, Honourable Tuisawau. You do not know what happened. You just simply are plucking at things without even understanding what it is. We have now protection for consumers. And as the Minister Premila Kumar highlighted, by having positive reporting, you need to actually use some form of intellect. By having positive reporting, obviously, as she highlighted, it means that you are actually going to say positive things about the consumer. This person has paid his water bill on time, electricity bill on time. They had a court's repayment paid on time. So therefore, if I want to go and take out some more loans, I get a positive report. Mr. Speaker, sir, he questioned the drafting of the bill. He has got absolutely no clue what he's talking about. But the point of the matter is there's no duplication of the Auditor General's work. This is internal audit. I do not know whether he understands that. This is internal audit, not external audit. Auditor General does the external audit. The overdraft limit has been increased from 20 million to 50 million. It was 20 million back in 2004. Since then, the size of the economy, the nominal GDP and revenue have doubled. So obviously it makes sense to have the OD facility from 20 million to $50 million. He's talking about the surcharging authority, because obviously the surcharging authority are not just permanent secretaries. Please read the budget book. If you read the budget book, at the end of it, you'll see that you have, for example, CEO, Water Authority Fiji, CEO, FRA. They're not permanent secretaries, but they also are an authority in respect of that particular head expenditure. So that's why we have to take an expensive view in that respect. Now, Mr. Speaker, so the other point that I also wanted to very quickly make, and I think it appears that all of them, in fact, have an issue with this particular amendment bill because of the requirement now for political parties to say how they will fund their election promises. And you see, they have such a sort of siege mentality. It will also apply to Fiji First. It does not only apply to SODELPA or NFP or any other political party. It applies to Fiji First. We will also have a manifesto. We will also need to say, for example, if we offer free education, if we offer, as we already are doing, and if we offer other things, we actually have to now, by law, say, how will we fund it? And I think what they are actually concerned about is that they've been making all these promises, and they have not said how they'll fund it. They can't even do a budget, an alternative budget. So that's why they are scared, is that come election time, when they go around making all these promises, there'll be a requirement for them to actually say how will they fund it. Mr. Speaker, sir, Honorable Gavoka, I really don't know where he's coming from. I mean, he talks about RIEs. I've had my staff from Ministry of Economy saying, please, sir, can you call him? Can you please call him to Ministry of Economy? We want to show him how R works. We've been saying this since 2014. R is short form for RIE. What does RIE? Requisition to incur expenditure. That's what R stands for. He's saying, I've got $700 million in my back pocket. How can I get $700 million in my back pocket? My pocket is not even large enough to carry $50. The point of the matter is, Mr. Speaker, sir, is that again, this is, trying to obfuscate the issues. And he knows that the Permanent Secretary for Economy is responsible for Head 50. He knows that. It's not money that I have gathered by myself and I'm sitting there. It's the PS's responsibility. If you look, and I've got the figures here, if you look at the $713 million, 500 million of that, Mr. Speaker, sir, is made up of 200 million for unemployment benefits, $50 million for electricity subsidy, food distribution, and all other relief measures, $165 million for tails and toppers, $40 million Fiji recovery rebate package, $20 million for the PPP, and $16.4 million should we have elections in this financial year. Mr. Speaker, sir, all of these require wholesale scrutiny. We have an entire budget team headed by a SOA, and they actually go through any of the requisitions that are made. They go step by step to make sure that all the documentations are met, all the requirements of the policy are met, all the checks and balances are there. And then should the requisition to incur expenditure is $1 million or less, the PS approves it. If it's more, then I have to see all the documentation. Is it okay? The PS recommends and says this should be paid out, then it's paid out. That's how the system works. And he completely tries to continuously obfuscate. He talks about, oh, why are we only going to give information just before the elections? Because the fact of the matter is, at the moment, we're already legally mandated to provide it every quarter. We do it in any case. Hasn't he been in Parliament?
I think you should go home.
Every quarter, Mr. Speaker, so I table in Parliament the quarterly financial report. This is another added layer of transparency that we have to provide that in the before the elections too, in the campaign period. So everybody knows what is the state of the economy. And that information has to be published on the website. Nobody can, obscure that. There's so much transparency. So, Mr. Speaker, sir, I mean, I think the contributions by the members of the other side have really been neither here nor there. But the fact of the matter is that I think they're completely concerned about the fact that they'll now actually be accountable to members of the public in the election promises that they do make. And
no more lies.
Precisely what the Honourable Prime Minister said. No more lies. They can't escape it now, Mr. Speaker, sir. They can't escape the truth. Mr. Speaker, sir, I would thank all the members who supported the bills, and I recommend that these bills be supported by Parliament. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, sir.